Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Hope my voice holds out. I've got a little one step forward, two steps back. Thankfully, my father's here to give me cough drops if I run out.
You better not run out because I'm out.
Oh,
I have.
yeah, well, I hope we don't get there. If I start hacking a little bit, you'll let me know. All right. Today we're starting a new parak. Baruch Hashem. We're starting the third parak of Maseches Kiddushin, parak HaOmer. We're starting on the bottom of Nun Chesamid Beis. Let us get started. Getting back to more classical cases of messed up Kiddushins. Normal. A man says to his friend, please go propose to woman X for me, Isha Plonis. And let's say I ask you to go do that. I want you to help me get engaged to Rachel. And the friend goes, says, wow, this is a beautiful Yiddish maidel. Sounds like a good match for me. Harat mekudeshes li. So I'm Phil, you're David, and you steal the woman that I wanted to marry.
You're missing out.
Says the Gemara, mekudeshes. Halacha l'maisa. Why not? There's no reason why they shouldn't be mekudeshes. Of course, the tabas has to be his. So he takes something of his own. Pasha, yeah. So the Gemara says mekudeshes l'sheni. She's married to the second man. So if I'm Phil and you're David, and David goes over to Rachel and says, "Oh, you know what? You really were supposed to be married to Phil, but I think I'd rather marry you." So then the halacha is that in fact it's not right. We'll see in the Gemara that it's not right. It's Ramos. It's sneaky. But Lamaisa, he's halachically, when you think in halachic terms of Pasha, that they're married. V'chein, and similarly, ha'omer leisha harehat mekudeshes li la'achar shloshim yom. If a man says to a woman, we'll be married after 30 days, uva acher v'kitsha b'soch shloshim yom, and a man interrupts on day 15, day 20, and says harehat mekudeshes li, and she accepts Kiddushin. Here as well, mekudeshes l'sheni, and the Mishnah then doubles down on how much they're actually married. It's not like some quasi-marriage, but Bas Yisrael l'Kohen tochal b'truma. Even if this marriage was to a Bas Yisrael, to a Kohen, she'd be allowed to eat truma, which is like the Torah's threshold of a definite marriage. You know, it's a little bit unique. It doesn't say they can sleep together. Like we're talking about truma, which has a more significant isser under the circumstances. What if they say, we don't know what this sentence means now, nor will we today, but we will in Yirtzeh Hashem over the coming days. But if he says now and after 30 days, so then this is a little bit more complicated. Again, we don't know the case, but the halacha is that it's mikudeshes ve'ena mikudeshes. And Rashi here adds a couple of words, l'shnehem, ve'asura l'shnehem, and she's asur to both of them. And says the Mishnah, Bas Yisrael l'Kohen or Bas Kohen l'Yisrael lo tochal b'truma, that in a case like this, she's not allowed to eat truma. This marriage is she's stuck in the twilight zone. She probably needs a get from both of them. Also not for today's conversations. Let's jump into the Gemara. Quoting from our Mishnah, we're 2 lines from the bottom on Nun Chesamid Beis. The Gemara says, Omer lechaveru tzei v'kadesh. So Tana, there's a brisa about our Mishnah. Masha asa asui, ela shanahag bo min agramos. What you've done, but you're a sneaky guy. That's not the right way to do things. It's not yashar. If your friend, if Phil sends David to propose to Rachel on behalf of Phil, and David chaps a ryan and says, "Haret mekudeshes li," and you're married. You're a jerk, but you're married. You did something wrong. It's not the right way to do things. And shenahag bo min agramos. A jerk. Deceitfully. No, he's a jerk. Sure. I have other words I would. Yeah, it's lashon b'nei adam.
But if he used the Malabias who sent him on his way and paid for his however he got there,
doesn't matter.
That's not
the Maisa Kiddushin is a product of his. That's a shava pruta that he gives to her. It's not that if I hire David is not a shliach on behalf of the woman. David's a shliach on behalf of me.
Right.
But it never got to her. He never did a shlichus.
But he used your funds to get there.
But the getting there has nothing to do with the Kiddushin. That's not okay. You like yesh ladun, but that
clear that I used his fund. How else would you get there? You're headed to such and such a place.
Could be also be true, but yeah, afal pi that you're right. Like David, you could be right, but afal pi that you're right. It doesn't matter because the Kiddushin still chal, and he's still married. She's still married to the second man. And Vitana Didan, our Mishnah also has another language because the parak started out with Haomer lechavero, and then on the first line of the Mishnah, then it says V'halach v'kitsha. Vitana Didan halach nami de katani halach b'ramos. So same thing, fine, same idea. And asks the Gemara, Maishna hacha, why is it that over here in our Mishnah, the katani haomer lechavero, yet earlier in the Masechta, in the previous parak, Maishna hasam, as we turn to the top of Nun Testament Aleph, where the language was the katani haomer l'shlucho. Interesting. The Gemara doesn't miss a beat, right? The Gemara wants to know how can it be that our Mishnah over here in the opening of this parak, of parak Omer, says Omer lechavero, and in the previous parak it says Omer l'shlucho. So the Gemara says Haka revusa kamash malan v'hasam revusa kamash malan. Over here in our Mishnah where it says Omer lechavero, there's what to be learned. There's a revusa, there's an inclusion, and so too in the previous parak. Let's go through both of them. Second line. Hacha revusa kamash malan. What do we learn over here? Di'itana, if our Mishnah would have said shlucho, so then havamina shluchohu dehave ramoy desamchadaite. Then the shliach, who's literally appointed mamish b'shlichus halachic shlichus. I said this today at a secular fraya bris today. I said, I'm not allowed to do this bris. It's not my child. You, the dad, you need to do this bris. And I just paused long enough for that to settle in. And then he's like, I don't want to do this bris. So then I said, no problem. Halacha has a model for you. And I quoted the Gemara, Shlucho shel Adam kamoso. My hands, as I slip my hands into the latex gloves, these hands are your hands for today. Appoint me as your shliach. He said, I hereby appoint you as my messenger. So says the Gemara over here, if he was taka, a real shliach, real halachic shlichus, that's when we would say that he's a ramoy. I was relying on you. So my assumption was that you're mamish a shliach, you're a halachic shliach, you're obligated to do exactly what I tell you. That's what the shlichus model is. Perhaps when I asked David to propose to Rachel for me, that was a little more hamish, it was a little bit more laid back. It wasn't shlichus mamish. Perhaps there's no ramos. Kamash Malon, that's not true. That's why the cases differ. That's why in our case it says lechavero. Even if it's lechavero, where there's no formal halachic shlichus, you're still a jerk. You still did it the wrong way. That's not the way to do things. Be a mensch. Go back to the person and say, I really think she's a better match. Have a conversation with the guy, but don't steal Rachel from under Phil. That's not the right way to do things. And Hasam on Daf Nun in the previous parak. Hasam also revusa kamash malan. There we have something to be learned as well. The Itana, 10 lines down, 8 lines down. The Itana haomer lechavero. If I would have had only the language of chavero, then hava mina chaverohu dechikitcha b'makom acher ena mekudeshes to savar lo tarach. Over there, we were talking about another issue, which was physical location. If I put the location of where I want you to propose to her on my behalf, then that may be le'ikufa. So I might have thought that if in that case, when we're discussing a marriage with a condition of location only spoke about a chaver, then I might have thought that the kitcha b'makom acher ena mekudeshes to savar lo tarach. The guy, he's just a friend. He's not going to try so hard. Aval shlucho de tarach ema maramakam hulo. But knowing that a shliach is going to fulfill his shlichus no matter what, okay, so he'll switch from Evanston to Skokie to West Rogers Park to Peterson Park, whatever. He'll figure it out. You got to go to Lakeview, he'll go to Lakeview. You got to go to Highland Park, he'll figure it out. So there may be maramakam hulo. No, kamash malan that in both cases. Both for a chavero and for shlucho, it is le'ikuva, that if a person says, please propose to Rachel in the city of X, it is the city of X in which they need to get married to get halachically engaged. A couple of quick stories. The Gemara says, 10, 12 lines down, Ravin Chasida, Azil Kiddushin Itza Libre. Fair warning, this is not normal. The Gemara says that Rav Chasida went to go find a young maidel for his son, and kitchel nafshe, and he proposed to her instead. So the father went to go on behalf of his son. So let's say the father is Shimon and the son is Chaim. So Shimon tells his son Chaim, I'm going to go find a girl for you. He goes to find a girl. He's single. Father's single. He's like, I think I'm going to marry her. So says the Gemara, V'hatanya, how in the world could Ravin Chasida do that? You're right that halachically it works, but that's not the way Yidden function. We don't do these sneaky workarounds. It doesn't work. I mean, it works, but it's not right. How could it be that Ravin Chasida would propose to the Kala of his son instead of giving the girl to his son? So the Gemara says, Lo Yahavua Nehale. The Gemara makes a new kimta. The scenario was that he went to talk to them, but the family wasn't willing to give over the daughter to the son. They were only willing to give over the daughter to Rav and Chasida. So therefore he said, fine, okay, I'm not married. She's a great girl. No problem. So therefore that's not Ramos, right? The Gemara is giving parameters of Ramos. It's not Ramos if when you get there, the activity couldn't be performed. I went to go find Rachel for my son. So I went there, and I meet her, and I said, I'd like you to marry my son. Parents saying, no way, can't marry your son, but you're a chashav b'talmid chacham, she can marry you. So then it's not Ramos anymore. That's fine, because what you set out to do can't be done. Therefore, it's mutter. Says the Gemara, but if you're a spitz mensch, you should have gone back to your son, and you should have said, look, Zis, I'm sorry, she didn't want to marry you, but she was willing to marry me, so I married her. So why didn't the father have to go back and tell the son? Says the Gemara, perhaps he would have, but Savar, that in the meantime, as he was going back and forth to tell the son that the Kala wasn't going to marry him, then the concern was that So what the Gemara here has done is it's given a parameter for Ramos. It's not considered Ramos if when you're sent to do X, you violate X and marry the person yourself. It's not considered Ramos if the woman wouldn't have married the original intended husband. And similarly, about a quarter of the way down, Rabbi Bar Chana Yoiv leZuza leRav. He gave money to Rav. Amar le Zavna nehale lahai ara. So Rabbi Bar Chana gave money to Rav, and he said, "I'd like you to please go purchase this piece of property for me." And then Ozal Zavna lenavshe, and then he went to go buy it himself. That's not nice. Same model, mutter, but not nice. This is like our concept in halacha called navel b'rshus haTorah. What you did is technically mutter, but it's not the right way to do things. So it says the Gemara, how can that be? Rav, the great Amor of Tanya, how can you say that? It's not right. You're doing something sneaky. Says the Gemara, Baga de Alimi Havale. The field belonged to a family that was very strong. And LeRav Nagabe Kavod, they liked Rav. They were willing to sell to Rav. And LeRabba Bar Bar Chana lo Nagabe Kavod. When it comes to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, they didn't want to sell to him. They weren't when this building was for sale, the one we're in right now, they wanted to build a mosque here. And they said, absolutely not. We don't want to sell to you. We want to sell to the Yidden. So they took from us. We paid with a mortgage. We were not paying cash. The other company was paying more. They didn't care. The church that was here before only sold to the Yidden. So here too, the Gemara says, it's Kaviyachal. Here the Gemara says that they were willing to sell to Rav, and they weren't willing to sell to Rav Kahana, to Rabbi Bar Chana. And because they were only willing to sell to Rav, that's not Ramos. That's not Masha Asa Asui, but Nagbo Minag Ramos. Maybe Rav should have gone back and spoken to Rabbi Bar Chana. Listen, I'm sorry, they don't want to sell to you. Says the Gemara, I thought the field would have been sold. So therefore the Gemara says that it's not considered Ramos. Almost halfway down, Rav Gidal was spending a lot of time looking into a particular property, checking out the property taxes, looking at the specs, whatever, all the details. And Azal Rebbe Abba Zavna. Rebbe Abba just jumps up and buys it. So Azal Rebbe Gidal was upset, and Kible le Reb Zera, he was received by Reb Zera to tell him that he was upset about what had happened. Reb Gidal was about to buy it. Rebbe Abba jumped in. Azal Reb Zera Kible Reb Yitzchak Nafcha. Reb Zera wasn't sure exactly how to navigate this, so he brought to Reb Yitzchak Nafcha, and Reb Yitzchak Nafcha said, "Hold on, everybody, slow down. Amar le hamtenat shiyala etzleinu l'regel. Let's wait till Rabbi Abba shows up for the Chag. When he shows up, I'll speak to him. I'll figure out what happened, why he took a property that he knew Rav Gidal was looking into." It says the Gemara, Kisalik, when Rabbi Abba came up for Aliyah the Regel, Ashkechem, who found him, the Gemara says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka found him. He said, if you have a poor person who's like trying to get his hands on a little bit of food, and somebody else goes and takes it, what's the status of that person? So this reminds me of the story of David HaMelech with Bathsheba, where the Nasan Hanavi came in and he gave a shtick mashal. He's like, oh, what could you imagine? Okay, same thing over here. if you see a poor person who's running through the dumpster trying to find the leftover hamburger and you take it out of his hands, what kind of person is that? The Gemara says, Amarle Nikra Russia. Rabbi Abba said that person's mamash Russia. So then Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka reveals the Nimshal. He says, but you took the property from Rav Gidol from right under his nose. Ve'elamar, my time of Hachi. Why would you do what you did? It doesn't make any sense that you would take a property that Rav Gidol was looking to buy. Amarle Lo Hava Yadana. I Pasha didn't know. We have these kinds of miscommunications all the time. So one of my favorite fights I ever had with my wife. We had just gotten back to America. My kids were, I don't know, this was 12 years ago, whatever, long time ago. My kids were little. And my wife, I got him from Shachris one day. My wife said, while you were gone, we had a huge fight. I'm just letting you know. I'm like, okay, did I win? Did I lose? How did the fight go? She said, well, I called your name 5 times to get up with the kids. And finally, I got up with the kids on my own. And I was annoyed that you didn't get up until I realized you weren't even home. Yeah. So I said, wow, okay. It looks like I won the fight. That's rare. I'll take the victory. I'll take the W whenever I can. So that's pure miscommunication. So he said the same thing. Rabbi Abba said, I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know Rav Gidel was looking into it. I had no idea. I was in the base of Medrash. Somebody said, do you want to buy this property? Sure. There's a property on Chase. Anybody want to buy this property? Right. So I didn't know. Leave me be. I didn't know. So it says the Gemara, Hashtanami, Nesva Nehalemar. This is already Midas Chasidus. Maybe you should still give him the property. That's a high level. He wants him to give it to him anyways. I actually can't sell it to you. To Ara Kamaisehi. It's my first property that I purchased. Again, what does this mean? It's not a good simon to give up your first property. Rashi quotes this line as well. Rashi is a third of the way down. It's not good to sell your first property. I didn't know that. I never heard of this Gemara. I don't know if this is the Maisa. And the Gemara says he didn't want to sell it, but wow, he says Rav Gidel could take the property as a gift. No problem. Rav Gidel lo nachisla, that wasn't comfortable for him to take it as a gift because the pasuk says in Mishlei v'sonim matanos yichya, people who hate gifts live longer. So that's a definite possibility.
Take a gift.
Well, maybe you should not. Rabbi Abba lo nachisla mishum dehafach bar Rav Gidel, and Rabbi Abba didn't want to keep the property because once he learned that Rav Gidel wanted the property, he didn't want to have any part of it. So nobody lived there. Says the Gemara, lo mar nachisla, lo mar nachis. These are like tzadikim gemurim. Right? Says the Gemara, umiskaria ara derabanan. That language was referred to as the rabbi's land. Very frum, very stark, very erlach, very sincere. Nobody used the property. Just a beautiful mutual respect that they weren't willing to do that. All right, next sugya. The Gemara says, "V'chein ha'omer li'isha hiskad shili." This case was, which case was this in our Mishnah? This was seemingly the second case in our Mishnah, which is a little bit of a different language. No?
After 30 days, another man came to kill her with.
No, I know, but I'm looking for the exact language in our Mishnah, which I'm not finding.
Yeah, that's good.
It's not hiskad
Not
shili.
exactly.
Yeah, I just didn't know that. Notice it until now, but I just want to make sure that we're learning the right thing here. Okay, it is correct because of the next line in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, how does that happen? Is that a typo? Was there another version of our Mishnah? I don't know.
But is Kachi like out in the area of the
I'm sure. We've seen hiskachi before. We've seen it.
Because it seems like just the Russian seems.
It's just a conjugation. It seems to be.
I know, but it seems more of like a colloquialism. Let's get married instead of we are Mekudeshes.
It definitely works. I mean, the way it's being quoted here, it's as though it's a replica or a replacement, I should say, of our Mishnah. Whatever it is, it works. That's for sure. So the Gemara says that was the case scenario in our Mishnah that we'll be married in 30 days. Says the Gemara, Lo abah acher v'kitsha b'soch shloshim yom mahu. If nobody shows up during those 30 days, what's the din? Rabbi Shmuel damar tavam nekudeshes v'af al pi shenisach lo hamos. Even if the money that I gave to her on day one, I gave her the money on day one. I read mekudeshes li b'kesev zu. That's our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, what if the money was consumed already? My time, they're Mekudeshes. Why are they married? Because hani zuze lo malva dam of lo pikadon dam. This money is not malva money, which we've spoken about in the Masechta earlier. But lo pikadon dam, it's also not a pikadon. Lo pikadon lo dama were 2 lines before the wide lines, 1 line before the wide lines. Why is it not like a pikadon? Because pikadon birshusa demar kamis achle v'hani birshusa dida kamis achle. When you have a pikadon, the woman is not allowed to use the pikadon. A pikadon's collateral; she's just holding it for him. So by virtue of the fact that she consumed it during those 30 days, that shows us that it wasn't a pikadon. And la malva namilo, first long line, that also can't be a malva dama. Why? Because milva lo tzanina. That's also not the case because milva is meant to be spent. So the Gemara says it must be hani b'tor's kiddushin yahavin let nehala. He gave it to her for very pure reasons. He gave it to her so that it's hers. Haret mikudeshes li v'kesef zu b'od shloshim yom. Kidas Moshe v'Yisrael, and Allah Chalamaisa, she is automatically married on day 30, whatever the exact moment is in time. I don't know. Is it 30? Is it halachic? Is it shkia? Is it seis? Is it meis leis? I don't know. But Lamaisa, she's married even if the money is not there anymore, because she received Kiddushin, she used it already. So that's interesting that if she received the Kiddushin and utilized it before the moment of marriage took place, she's fully married. We don't need the Kiddushin to be be'en. We don't need the money to be present. They'll be married either way. Lo ba'achir v'kidsha. Let's say that nobody else was there to marry her. V'chazra ba mahu. And she wanted to recant. He said, Harad mekudeshes li ba'od shloshim yom kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. And on day 29, she said, I'm not interested anymore. Can she recant? It's interesting because now there's a time gap between the transaction of the Kiddushin and when they are actually married. So during that gap of time, are they considered married or not? The Gemara says, Rav Yochanan Amar Choseres, she's allowed to be Choser, and this is the sugya we're going to be discussing. Asi dibur umevatel dibur. Her dibur can undo the dibur that he said. And Reish Lakish Amar Eino Choseres lo asi dibur umevatel dibur. That's not allowed. So I'm just going to tell you now, all of this is version 1 of the machlokas of Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Let's get it very clear, because on the next page, we're going to totally change this machlokas. The case was where a man says to a woman, Harat mikudeshes li b'kesef zu kedas Moshe v'Yisrael b'shloshim yom. Day 29 shows up, and she says, I no longer want to be married. Does that count? Yes or no? Machlokas Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to whether or not asi dibur and levata dibur, can her dibur go and undo the dibur from 29 days ago? Rav Yochanan says it works. Reish Lakish says it does not work. We're going to have a couple of questions on this. Here's question number 1. 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Esvei Rav Yochanan the Reish Lakish. Rav Yochanan's asking on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was of the opinion that Eina Choseres, that her dibur cannot be Mavatal dibur. Well, we have a kasha on that from the following source. In regards to Truma, if I send you to do Truma and then Bitel, I change my mind. Imat Shelo Taram Bitel, if I, as the owner, do bittel, I stop you from giving the truma, then ain't truma so truma, then the truma is not chal. But if when I make my okay, so that's what the Mishnah says. Why is it that that's the case? The dibur v'kaasi dibur mavatal dibur. What do we see over here? We see that dibur is mavatal dibur, because if I say, okay, I sent you an hour ago to go give my truma, but an hour later I stopped you and said, wait, stop. I don't want you to do it anymore. So my dibur is mavatal dibur. That's a kasha against Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says ain't dibur mavatal dibur. So that's a kasha from the world of truma v'kaasi dibur mavatal dibur. The Gemara says, shining asinos maos liad isha. You can't compare the case of truma to Kiddushin. By the case of Kiddushin, a man actually gave a woman something, and that is dechi maisa damo. That is considered a maisa and not a dibur. Velo asi dibur umevatel maisa. Beautiful answer to a reasonable question. What about truma, where we see the dibur is mevatel dibur kasha on Reish Lakish? The Gemara says not a kasha on Reish Lakish, because the case of truma is taka dibur and dibur, but the case of Kiddushin is not dibur and dibur; it's maisa and dibur, and ein dibur mevatel maisa. Beautiful. That was question number 1. Question 2, 6 lines from the bottom, first red line, Esvei. Hasholech get leishto, a man sends a get to his wife. V'higia b'shliach, and it was being brought to her with a messenger. O sheshalach acharav, or he sent afterwards, shliach v'amar lo, get shenasati loch batel hu harezeh batel. So here, in a case of getting, we see that there's bittul of a get. Ay v'hanasinas get liyad shliach, v'chinasinas mos liyad isha dami. When I gave the get over to the shliach, that was a maisa. And yet, what do we see? The katani hareze batel, and therefore we see that a dibur can even be mevatel a maisa, because there was a maisa nesinas getting to the shliach. The Gemara says, Hasam Nami, Kol Kama Telomata Gita Liyada, Dibor V'Diboru. You're right that I, as the husband, gave the get to the shliach, but until that get reaches the hands of the woman, it's not considered a maisa. By the Kiddushin, the money was given straight to the woman. By the get, I gave it to my shliach. I didn't give it to her shliach, I gave it to my shliach. And therefore, no comparison between the two cases. Just make sure I read it all. And Asi Dibur Mevatel Dibur. But Dibur does work to be Mevatel. That's how that brisa makes sense. Here's question number 3. Now we have a kasha and a shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion of Asi Dibur Mevatel Dibur. This brisa says, now we're getting into Maseches Kalim. The Mishnah says, Kol HaKelim Yordan Lidei Tumasan B'Machshava. Any kli can become susceptible to tuma by machshava. There used to be this place in New York City called Our Name is Mud. People used to go on dates there all the time. It was a pottery place. And what you would do is you'd paint the outside of it. They put it in a kiln. You'd come back on your second date and pick it up. Super cute. What if I decide once I painted it that I don't care if it goes in the kiln? So the Gemara says, based on the Mishnah and Kalim, it's a Tosefta and Kalim, that the second my brain decides I don't care for finishing the Kli anymore, now the Kli is finished based on my machshava, and now it's susceptible to Tuma. If it's not done yet, it's not a Kli. If I needed to go into the kiln, it's not a Kli. But b'machshava, Yordan lidei tumasim b'machshava, I can change the status to make it susceptible. So that's what this line means. Let's read it again. Kol HaKelim, any kli that I'm in the middle of working on, and I decide now that it's done, Yordan lidei tumasan, they now become susceptible to tuma b'machshava, and ve'ein olen midei tumasan, and they can't be removed from tuma ela b'shinui ma'isa. If it becomes tamei, the only way that I can get it to actually be solved, to be fixed, is with a ma'isa. Machshava will not work. Turning to the top of an Testament base, because of the length of the daf and the nuance of the daf, we're going to again stop about 2/3 of the way down. Lemaisa, the way things are probably going to play out this week is I'm going to post tomorrow during the day, and we'll probably have a shiur on Friday. I have to look at my schedule for Friday, but I'm guessing. So tomorrow night for sure, not in person, because I'm teaching a different class then, uncontrollable. It's not Torah, don't worry about it. So the Gemara says over here at the top of the page, what do we see from this case in Kalim? The Gemara says in the case in Kalim, Maisa, most likely, Maisa umiyad machshava. If I do a Maisa, if I do an action can undo a previous action, and it can also undo a machshava for sure, because a Maisa is more powerful than a machshava. However, machshava ein motzia lo midei Maiser v'lo miyad machshava. But a machshava can't do anything. A machshava can't undo a Maisa for sure. And guess what a machshava also can't undo? Can't do another machshava. Bishlam miyad Maisa lo mafka. That I understand. The lo asi dibur mevatel Maisa. I understand the first part of this. Clear. That makes sense. A machshava is not as strong as a Maisa. A machshava can't undo a Maisa. Got it. Ella, fourth line on Nun Testament base. Ella miyad machshava miyatafik. It should be that it should be the case that a machshava can undo a machshava. But because it doesn't in this Mishnah and Kalim, so therefore, we're left with a big kasha on Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan said that asi dibur or mevatel dibur, but over here we see that a machshava is not going to be mevatel a machshava. So says the Gemara, great question. Shiny machshava de tuma d'chimai sadami. The Gemara says that in regards to tuma, a machshava is equivalent to a maisa. What does that even mean? Says the Gemara, de Rav Papa. De Rav Papa Rami. Rav Papa asked a kasha on psukim. We have one, it's not really a kasha on two psukim, it's a kasha within one pasuk. Ksiv, the pasuk says ki yitain, and if you look at the side, if you have the psukim there, the pasuk does not read v'chi yitain. The pasuk reads v'chi yutan ma'im al zerav nafal miniv lasam alav tamehu lachem. This is the pasuk that teaches us the idea that when there's a liquid medium, then something becomes subject to tuma. If I have a red bell pepper and it's not wet, you cannot transfer tuma to it. When there's a liquid medium, it can then become tamei. So the Gemara says that the pasuk looks like ki yitain, but v'karinan ki yutan. One of them is that when he makes it wet, when he pours water on it or makes the red bell pepper wet, and the Karinan Bay, how we read it is kiyutan, when water is put on it, even if not by him, but let's say it rains, let's say somebody spilled a bucket. Haketzat, how do we understand the technical reading, what the pasuk seems to be, which is kiyutain, and kiyutan, which is how Chazal told us to read it. Haketzat, kiyutan dumya dechiyutain. When it says kiyutan, that when it gets wet by itself, when water spills on it, a monkey spills a cup of water on it, whatever the case may be, so that has to be similar to kiyitain. What does that mean? Mayitain denichale. Just like the only way that liquid will make that red bell pepper susceptible to tuma is if I, the owner, want liquid on that red bell pepper. The same is true with v'chiyutan. If a monkey spilled water on the red bell pepper, it would not be susceptible to tuma. There needs to be a kavana for the water to be there in order for the tuma to be a real tuma, in order for the liquid to be susceptible to tuma. So therefore, we view that as a maisa. That when it becomes a tameh, it's done through the machshava, which is a maisa at the same time. All of this was version 1 of what we thought the machlokas was between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And Rav Zvid masni lahashmait sa'aha. Rav Zvid said everything is different. This is version 2 of the last 20 lines. We're going to see a lot of repetitive Mari Mekomos, and then we are going to stop at those 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down, about 8 lines into the wide lines. V'chein, what is the case that we have a machlokas about? V'chein, hisha nasna rishus l'shlucha l'kadsha. She gave permission to a shlucha, to a messenger l'kadsha. So let's say Rachel says to Leah, Leah, I want you to be my shlucha, so that when Phil comes to propose, you can accept the Kiddushin on my behalf. Leah, let's take my name out of the equation. Leah met David. David was a great guy. And David and Leah hit it off. And then Leah accepted Kiddushin for herself. So says the Gemara, Im Shela Kadmo Kiddushin. If her own Kiddushin came first and they're married. V'im Shel Shlucha Kadmo. If the Shlichus took place first, and Kiddushin. And then the Gemara says, Lo Kitchas Atzma B'Chazraba. What if she didn't propose herself and the original person, Rachel, wanted to recant on what she thought was going to be a reasonable Kiddushin? Here is where Rav Zvid says we have a machlokas. Rav Yochanan Omer Choseres. Rabbi Yochanan says it's a fine chazara. Reish Lakish Amar Eina Choseres. Reish Lakish says it is not a fine chazara. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Choseres in this case because Asi Dibur Mevatel Dibur. Rabbi Yochanan says that they're Choser because she's allowed to be Mevatel, her Dibur. Reish Lakish Amar Eina Choseres. Reish Lakish says no, you're not allowed to be Choseres because Lo Asi Dibur Mevatel Dibur. So if we compare the cases, Rav Zvid is talking about a thoroughly different case than what we were talking about. Our version 1, just to get all this clear, version 1 of our machlokas was talking about a case of if she wanted to recant when he was mekadesh her in the beginning of 30 days. That's where we had the machlokas of Yochanan Reish Lakish. But this says something different. Rav Zvid said the machlokas is when she sends out a shlucha, and the shlucha takes the Kiddushin for herself. And there the Gemara says that if she wants to do a chazara, that's where the machlokas is. So it says the Gemara, we have a number of questions on this. We're a third of the way down at the word esvei. The first one on the line is umevatel. Esvei Rav Yochanan the Reish Lakish. Rav Yochanan asks the kasha on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish had said that lo asi dibur umevatel dibur, and the kasha is like this. Bitel in regards to truma, imat shelo taram bitel ain't truma so truma. But if in fact he does succeed in saying if in fact he does succeed in doing bitel, ain't truma so truma, which shows us that dibur is mevatel dibur, kasha on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish would answer, Amar Rava hacha b'maya skinan kigon shekadam bala bais v'taram eskirio. He said, no, there's an ukimta over there to havalei maisa where there already was truma taking place, and therefore that case is with a maisa. He gives an ukimta. That case is not a kasha on Reish Lakish. Esvei Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish asks the kasha and Rav Yochanan. As we spoke about, if I decide that when a kli is 90% done, I decide I'm no longer going to do the last step. I'm not going to put it in the kiln. I'm going to drink out of it this way, no matter what I do. Therefore, it becomes susceptible to tuma. But if a kli is tameh, then we need to do a maisa to fix it. And says the Gemara, like we saw at the top of the page, but in version 1, now we're asking this kasha on the new machlokas. Maisa mosi midei maisa umiyad machshava. If I do an action can solve a previous action and a machshava. But machshava ein motzia lo midei maisa lo midei machshava. But a machshava cannot remove an action, and a machshava can't even override another machshava. Bishlama miyad maisa lo mafka lo asi dibur mevatel maisa. I understand the brisa at the top of the page and the brisa requoted here. A maisa can't be uprooted by dibur. That I understand. We're halfway down 2 lines before the wide lines. But my machshava should be able to uproot a machshava. And because it is not able to do that, that's a kasha on Rav Yochanan, who says that dibur should be mevatel dibur. So to this, the Gemara says, Omar Lei, what would Rav Yochanan say? Shiny machshava, the tuma dechi maisa dami. As we saw earlier, when it comes to tuma, a machshava is like a maisa. Where do we see this? The Rav Papa. The Rav Papa, Rami, he asked the kasha, ki yitain v'karinan ki yutan. The pasuk says when he places water on the red bell pepper, but the pasuk is red v'chi yutan, not when he places, but when water is placed on the red bell pepper. How do we understand this seemingly odd difference between how the pasuk is written and how the pasuk is read? The Gemara says, "Ki yutan dimya de yitain." When we say that water is put on there not by a person, it has to be similar to when a person himself directly puts it on there. Ma yitain de nichale. Just like when I put the water on the red bell pepper, it's because I want it there. I want to make the food susceptible to tuma. Then the water is functional in transferring tuma. Af yutan nami de nichale. But also must also be the case that even if I'm not the one to put it there, but however the water gets there, it has to be the nichale. That's why if there's a red bell pepper, let's say a jewel, right? If you've ever shopped a jewel, and I'm sure we all have, you buy vegetables off of the wall, the machine turns on only right when you stick your hand out, it sprays water all over you. That's kiyutan. That's not a person putting it. Nobody wants it to be wet. That is not susceptible to tuma. Nobody wants that water there. So that's what the Gemara means when it says kiyutan, haketzad, that they have to be desirable for it to be tummy. So therefore, that's considered like a machshava, that's a maisa, because something's actually happening over here. Water is being put on it. Therefore, no kasha against Rav Yochanan. Question 3, Esvei Rav Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. And this we're going to see is going to be the real thorn in the side of Reish Lakish that rejects his shita. Here the shliach manages to get a message from the balabais that it's batel. Harei ze batel. Teyufta de Reish Lakish teyufta. We see over here that dibur is a functional way to override dibur. And what did Rabbi Yochanan say? That was Rabbi Yochanan's shita. Reish Lakish said no. Dibur is not mevatel dibur, but this brisa is black on white against Reish Lakish. Tiyufta, the Gemara says you're right. V'ilchasa kavasid Rabbi Yochanan. We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, and here the Gemara takes a spin. Not only is the din like Rabbi Yochanan in our case, in Rav Zvid's case, where he changed the case to her having a shlucha, but ve'afilu bekamaisa, even in the previous case on page 1, on Nun Testament Aleph, where we learned this previous case where there was a machlokas, v'yafal gav de ikalam meimar, even though one could argue, shining the sinas mostly de isha de chamaisa dami. Maybe it's different when you hand the woman something, you give her the Kiddushin, that's a maisa. Even so, we still paskin like Rav Yochanan, lekula, the dibur is mevatel dibur. Afilu hachi asi dibur mevatel dibur. Okay, so we paskin like Rav Yochanan in both cases. That's what the Gemara concludes. We have one side question to answer. Kasha hilchasa hilchasa. You just said hilchasa, the halach is like Rav Yochanan, that dibur is mevatel dibur. The Gemara says nisht pashut. Why not? Because kasha hilchasa hilchasa amr hilchasa like Rav Yochanan. You said the halach is like Rav Yochanan, and elsewhere we hold v'kaimelan hilchasa like Rav Nachman. In another case, we hold that the halach is like Rav Nachman. Where do we hold that the halach is like Rav Nachman? The ibayalahu ma'u sheyachzor v'yigaresh bo. What if a person is choser on a get that he wanted to be mevatel and remarry a person. Rav Nachman Amar choser umegarish bo. He's allowed to do a chazara, which means that his initial bittul didn't work, which means dibur is lav mevatel dibur. Kasha on the hilchasas. Sheshes Amar Eino choser megarish, but Rav Sheshes argues on Rav Nachman. But we paskin like Rav Nachman. So if we paskin like Rav Yochanan, who holds dibur is mevatel dibur, and we paskin like. If we paskin like Rav Yochanan, the dibur is mevatel dibur, and we paskin like Rav Nachman, the dibur is not mevatel dibur, then the two hilchasas are a stira to one another. So it says the Gemara, "V'kayim and hilchas hakavaz Rav Nachman." What are we supposed to do? We have a stira. So it says the Gemara, "Nihi that in that latter case of Rav Nachman, the batle mitorah shliach, when the husband stopped the whole interaction, he wasn't mevatel the get, he was mevatel the shlichus." If I hire Ruvain to bring my wife a get, I bring my wife, I tell him, please bring my wife a get. And I say, wait, stop. What am I stopping? Am I saying the get is invalid? Or am I saying stop being my shliach right now? So the Gemara says that we're not stopping the get. We're stopping the shlichus. And therefore, nihi debatle mitorah shliach, but mitorah's get lo batle. He wasn't ruining the get in the case of Rav Nachman, only ruining the shlichus, but still Rav Nachman could hold that dibur is mevatel dibur. We'll stop right here. We'll pick up with the recorded shiur tomorrow. Wishing you all a beautiful night.